Okay, some thoughts on Gary Rowett and being appointed as the new Millwall manager. Rowett, interestingly enough, is probably the manager I get asked about most, mainly because I think a lot of the people I interact with on social media and stuff like that are big EFL followers, and I think he's a manager that a lot of people who like and follow the EFL have a lot of time for, because we all seen him come through at League Two level and kind of knew that he was cut from a different cloth. He was a very shrewd tactician and understood the game, and expected him to go on to big things. But he's also hit a patch in his career now where he's been unconvincing in his last, well, certainly in his last job at Stoke. I think he did a very good job at Derby in the prior to that. But there's a sense now that he's a bit one-dimensional, and that we know what we're getting from a Gary Rowett team, and it hasn't really changed in 5 or 6 years. So people are kind of wondering where he's at in the scheme of things now, because his stock has probably never been lower after Stoke, and the fact that he's taken the Millwall job has surprised some people. I think it's the right job for him to take. I think it's a great job for him to take. I think the way he's always played the game has been, an underdog approach, really. He's quite happy for other teams to have the ball. He doesn't, it's not necessarily free flowing in the attacking sense. The bedrock of his teams is always a solid base, and I think the jobs he's done so far have always been perceived better when he's with teams that are smaller relative to the division. Now, Millwall do belong in the Championship. I do believe they're a Championship club. You look at their history, and you're talking, I think it's 46 years in the third tier, 46 years in the second tier. So they're a club that belongs in between. When they're in good health, they're a Championship club, and when they're in bad health, they're a League One club. I think that's the way to just generally look at Millwall. So staying in League One and playing football and having basically, just big games within a season, rising to the occasion for big matches, potentially having cup runs, things like that. That's very much the Millwall identity. And what I always ask myself when a new manager comes into a new club and there's a change of manager at any club is, does that club want change or does it want continuity? Because you can change your manager. Obviously, it wants change in the sense of a new profile in the dugout, a new manager. But you don't necessarily want a change of identity. With Millwall, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the culture, they really don't want to throw away the culture that Neil Harris has built, because I think they've really rediscovered themselves in the past few years under Harris, but they just kind of ran out of ideas in the football sense. And I think Rowett solves that problem. I think they're very similar personality types, but whereas Harris's focus and his driver flow state is on those, collective relationships between people and making the club, the fans feel part of the club and all of those kinds of dynamics. I think that was Harris's strength, and I think he leaves the club in a fantastic position from that perspective. But you get the impression that he reached a point where he'd kind of run out of ideas on the football side. He did a rebuild in the summer. He kind of went stale. He went through a full cycle of a lot of the same players that were in League One were still there in the Championship. They'd all developed together. They'd all reached a certain point, and then kind of just stagnated, as if they'd heard it all before. Whatever Harris was saying to them in the build-up to matches, in the dressing room, at half-time, whatever it might be, you kind of got the impression that Millwall had become a club where the players in the dressing room had heard everything that Harris had to say now, and it all went stale last season. So then Harris tried a rebuild in the summer, and it's become quite evident quite early this season that he's not sure he's going to get any more out of this new bunch of players than what he got last season. And I think everybody knows what Millwall are about now and can prepare for a game against Millwall. And that became a problem for Harris, because he didn't necessarily have an edge to take it forward. But the recruitment's been good. It was good under Harris in the first cycle, and I do believe the recruitment that they made over the summer was, gives Rowett plenty to work with. So I think you've got players there that are going to buy into, on the football side, the ideas that Rowett brings, that already bought into the culture of what playing for Millwall means and what it's all about, and what's expected of you in terms of aggression and territory, and you know, just that masculinity that Millwall have been renowned for many years. But with Rowett, I think they have a little bit of an extra edge now in the football sense. I think in terms of tactical subtlety, and you know, we talk about him being a defensive manager, but he is a very shrewd manager. He knows where he identifies the problems quickly and can fix them, you know. And I just think that Millwall are going to be a really stubborn team, really difficult to beat under Rowett, but also capable of rising to those big occasions, because I think Rowett is an excellent big game tactician. I think we saw it when, you know, possibly the best example was one of his last games for Derby in the playoffs against Fulham. They beat Fulham 1-0 at home, and I think they changed to 3 at the back on the night. But whatever the tactics were, he got them spot on. Fulham were absolutely motoring towards the end of that season and looked like they were going to be unstoppable in the playoffs. But in the first leg, Derby really did a job on them, and I think that's on big one-off occasions. I think that's what Rowett's capable of. I think he's capable of creating a team that's extremely difficult to beat by and large, but also capable of rising it for big occasions. And I think that's what Millwall are all about. I don't think they're a club that expects to ever, you know, that expects to be getting to the Premier League or finishing top 6. They like to be knocking on the door. They like to think that there's some life in their season. But they also want to raise it for big games. You know, big games against Leeds, for example, Charlton now in the Championship, and you know, FA Cup matches, and this tradition they've got with the FA Cup, especially in the last, you know, 10 or 15 years or so. That's something they want to keep going, and I think that's something that Rowett can deliver. I think he can deliver a lot of intelligence for one-off matches, you know, tailored for specific opposition, but also just in the main make them more difficult to beat and give them more of a football identity now, because I think that cultural identity is already there, and that's thanks to Harris.